For 10 years she lived as a silent Omega, until her true alpha blood awakened. A true story. Elena woke up before the sun every single morning, not because she wanted to, not because anyone was kind enough to call her name. She woke up because, after 10 years, her body had learned that she had no right to sleep past the first sign of light. She folded her blanket slowly, pressing the corners together with care, making sure the edges were straight. It was the one thing in her day that she had full control over. Everything else, where she went, what she ate, who she spoke to, and how long she was allowed to stand still, all of that was decided by others. But the blanket was hers, so she folded it perfectly, every single morning, without fail. The compound was a large, old property, deep in the mountains of northern Romania. Stone walls, wooden floors, cold corridors that never seemed to warm up, even in summer. Elena had lived there since she was 21 years old, when her mother passed away, and left her with nothing except a small locket on a chain and a single instruction: keep it close, and do not open it until the time is right. Elena did not know what the right time meant, so she had worn the locket every day for 10 years and never touched the clasp. She was 31 now, and every day looked more or less the same. She carried water, she prepared fires, she cleaned the long dining table before anyone sat down, and she was the last one allowed to eat after everyone else had finished, if there was food left. If there was not, she went to bed with an empty stomach and said nothing about it. This was the life of an Omega. That was what they called her. In the world Elena lived in, a world hidden from ordinary people, a world of old bloodlines and pack law and inherited power, rank meant everything. Alphas led, betas served and worked. Omegas, like Elena, were considered the lowest, the weakest, the ones who had no strength worth respecting. Elena did not fight this. She had tried once, in her first year at the compound, when a young man named Radu had taken the portion of food she had been saving for herself and walked away laughing. She had looked at him, just looked. And the elder of the compound, a sharp-eyed old man named Doran Varick, had appeared from across the room and said to her, very quietly, "Omegas do not have expressions like that." She had lowered her eyes immediately, and she had never let herself look that way again. 10 years. That was how long she had practiced becoming invisible. But something was happening to her lately that she could not explain. It started 3 weeks ago, on a cold Tuesday evening. She had been alone in the storage cellar, counting jars of preserved vegetables, when a strange feeling passed through her. It began in her chest, a pressure, low and steady, like something pushing from the inside. Then her hands started shaking, not from cold, not from fear, from something she had no name for. She sat down on the floor of the cellar, pressed her back against the stone wall, and breathed slowly until it passed. When she finally stood up and returned to her room, she noticed something unusual. The scent that rose from her own skin was different. Sharper, cleaner, completely unlike the neutral, forgettable scent she had always carried. She opened her window and let the cold mountain air wash it away. Eventually it faded, but it had taken longer than it should have. She told no one. She went back to work the next morning like nothing had happened. Then the foreign delegation arrived. They came on a gray afternoon, traveling in 2 large vehicles that parked in the gravel courtyard. Elena watched from the window of the storage room as the doors opened. Men and women stepped out, all of them carrying themselves with the kind of ease that comes from knowing you belong wherever you stand. Their leader was a woman who looked to be in her mid-40s, with silver hair worn short and dark eyes that took in the entire courtyard in one slow glance. Her name, Elena would learn, was Alpha Kira Helvor. She was visiting for a formal meeting between packs, a territorial discussion that Elena had no part in and no business asking about. Elena was assigned to serve at the dinner table that evening. She was told, very specifically, not to speak unless asked a direct question, and not to make eye contact with anyone from the visiting delegation. She followed both instructions. She moved quietly around the table, refilling glasses, removing empty plates, keeping her gaze down. The conversation at the table was loud and confident, full of names and places she did not recognize. She was reaching across to clear a plate near the end of the table when she felt it, a pair of eyes on her. Not the quick, dismissive glance she was used to receiving. These eyes stayed. She did not look up. She finished her task, and turned back toward the kitchen. She was almost through the door when the woman's voice reached her. "You, with the locket! Stop a moment!" Elena stopped. She turned. Alpha Kira Helvor was looking at her from across the room. Not with cruelty, not with the casual authority that people like Doran Varek wore like a coat. She was looking at Elena the way someone looks when they have just noticed something they did not expect to find. Elena stood still and waited. "Come here," Kira said. She walked to the woman. She stopped a few feet away and kept her gaze at the level of Kira's collarbone, as she had been trained. Kira was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a lower voice meant only for Elena, "You smell wrong for what they say you are." Elena did not respond. She did not know how to respond. Kira leaned in slightly, the way alphas sometimes did when they were reading a bloodline, and inhaled once. Then she pulled back. Something shifted in her expression. She looked at Elena for one more moment, then said, almost to herself, "Someone went to a great deal of trouble." She turned back to the table without explaining. The conversation around her resumed. Elena walked back to the kitchen and stood by the sink for a full minute before she was able to move again. Her hands were shaking. That night, unable to sleep, Elena sat on the floor of her room with the locket resting in her palm. She had held it like this 100 times over the years. Always, she had closed her fingers around it and set it down. Always, the clasp had stayed shut. Tonight, the clasp opened on its own. It gave way with a soft, clean click, the kind of sound that something makes when it has been waiting a long time and has finally decided to stop waiting. Inside was a piece of paper, folded so many times it was nearly the size of a coin. Elena unfolded it carefully, afraid it would tear. The handwriting on it was her mother's. She recognized it immediately, even after 10 years. The letters were small and neat, pressed firmly into the paper. She read it by the thin light of the candle on her windowsill. Her mother wrote that Elena was the daughter of a man named Aldrich Vasil, the last leader of an old and nearly extinct bloodline called the Vasil Prime Line, alphas of enormous power. Hunted by those who feared what that bloodline could become, Aldrich had been taken from them before Elena was born. Mira, her mother, had fled while she was still carrying her daughter. To protect Elena, Mira had performed a ritual, an old and difficult thing that suppressed all signs of Elena's true bloodline. Her scent, her presence, the frequency that any real alpha carries, and that others can feel without understanding why. All of it had been pressed down, locked inside, hidden behind the mask of an omega, hidden well enough that even Elena herself had never known. The ritual was never meant to last forever. Mira had written that it would begin to fail on its own when Elena's blood reached a point of readiness. When that happened, the locket would open. The last lines of the letter were the ones that stayed with Elena the longest. Her mother wrote, "My darling, I am sorry for the years of silence. I hope, when you read this, that you will understand I had no other way to keep you safe. You were never what they told you, not for a single day. You were always something much greater, and I kept you still, only long enough for you to survive. Now please, survive differently." Elena set the letter down on her knee. She did not cry. She sat in the quiet of her small room for a very long time. Then she folded the letter back, pressed it into the locket, and held it to her chest. The days that followed were difficult in ways she had not expected. The suppression, whatever her mother had placed on her blood, was falling apart rapidly now, as though the locket opening had been the final signal it needed to let go. Elena could not stop it. She could not slow it down. Her scent changed in waves, sometimes subtle, sometimes sharp enough that people turned their heads when she walked into a room without understanding why. The young man Radu, who had never once looked away first when she entered a space, began avoiding her eyes completely. Younger members of the pack grew quiet when she stood near them. Doran Varek watched her from across the courtyard one morning, with an expression she had never seen on his face before. The only person who spoke to her directly was Sasha, a calm, practical woman who had worked in the compound for years and had always treated Elena with quiet, simple decency. Sasha found her in the garden one afternoon and said plainly, without drama, "Whatever is happening with you, you need to keep it steady. People are noticing." Elena looked at her for a moment. Then she told her everything. Sasha was still for a long time after Elena finished. Then she nodded once and said, All right, that was all. No disbelief, no panic, just 2 words. And then she stayed standing beside Elena in the garden for a while, which was, in its own small way, the most supportive thing anyone had done for Elena in 10 years. Doran Varick called Elena to the Elders' Hall 4 days later. When she arrived and saw the room full of pack members, her pack and the visiting delegation both, standing along the walls, she understood immediately. This was not a conversation. This was a formal blood test, a ranking verification. The kind of thing performed when someone in authority already suspected the answer and wanted it confirmed in front of witnesses. She walked to the center of the room. The ritual stone sat on a low platform, a dark gray slab with old marks cut into its surface, used for generations to confirm bloodline rank. The silver blade beside it caught the light. She noticed Alpha Kira standing near the far wall, arms folded, watching Elena with still, steady eyes. Doran Varick gestured for Elena to hold out her hand. She did. The blade opened her palm cleanly. She held her hand over the stone and let 3 drops of her blood fall. The room was completely silent. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the stone cracked. A single clean split ran down the center of the 200-year-old ritual stone, and the sound it made, sharp and absolute, seemed to stop time. Elena felt the change in herself at the same moment. The suppression, which had been unraveling for weeks, released entirely in one sudden, enormous wave. It was not painful. It was the opposite of pain. It was the feeling of something that had been pressing against her from every direction for 10 years, simply letting go. The scent that left her in that moment filled the entire hall. She could not see it, but she could feel the room react to it the way a field reacts to the first cold wind before a storm. Everything going still, everything paying attention. Radu, standing near the door, slowly bent one knee and went down without realizing he was doing it. Several others stepped back. One of them looked genuinely afraid. Doran Varick's face was white. Alpha Kira uncrossed her arms and walked to the center of the room. She moved calmly, without hurry, and stood beside Elena. Not in front of her, beside her. "The Vasile bloodline is not extinct," she said, looking directly at Doran Varick. Her voice was steady and clear. "Whatever agreement was made regarding this woman's classification, that agreement is finished. I formally recognize her lineage before both packs." She paused for exactly 1 moment. "Challenge it if you have grounds." No one spoke. Doran Varick, who had survived 70 years by choosing his battles wisely, looked at Elena for a long moment. Then he stepped back. He said nothing. He simply stepped back, and the silence in the room changed quality. From the silence of shock into something that felt, at least to Elena, like the end of an old argument. She did not feel triumphant. She had expected, somewhere in the back of her mind, that a moment like this, if it ever came, would feel like winning something. It did not feel like winning. It felt like stepping out of a room she had been locked in for so long that the fresh air on the other side was almost too much. That evening, she sat alone on the low stone bench beside the compound's vegetable garden. The moon was out. The mountains were dark shapes against a darker sky. She sat and thought about 10 years. Not with bitterness, though she allowed herself to feel the weight of it honestly. 10 years of rising before sunrise. 10 years of folding her blanket perfectly, because it was the only thing she controlled. 10 years of keeping her eyes down, and her voice quiet, and her whole self pressed into as small a space as possible. Her mother had done it to protect her. She understood that. She believed it, completely and without question. But she was also allowed to feel the loss of those years, and so she did. She sat on the stone bench and she felt it fully, and then she let the night air move past her, and she breathed. Sasha found her there an hour later, and sat down beside her without saying anything. After a few minutes, Elena spoke first. "I want to leave," she said simply. "I know," Sasha said. "I have wanted to leave for 10 years. I know that too." They sat together quietly for another little while. Then Sasha said, "I'll come with you if you want." Elena looked at her. She thought about what that meant. Someone choosing to come with her. Not because they were assigned to, not because it was their role, just because they wanted to. "Yes," Elena said, "I want that." She left the compound on a cool morning in early autumn. The gravel crunched under her shoes. The gate at the end of the property stood open. Alpha Kira had arranged it formally, under Interpack law, so that no one could stop her or follow her against her will. She did not look back at the stone walls. She did not look back at the windows or the courtyard, or the long table where she had served for a decade. She looked forward, at the road that wound down through the trees and disappeared into the valley. She was not healed. She understood that. One morning of walking out a gate did not undo 10 years of learning to disappear. She knew she would have days ahead of her that were hard in different ways. Days when the silence she had been trained to carry would feel louder than anything else. Days when the open space in front of her would feel larger than she was ready for. But she also knew something she had not known before. She knew who she was. She knew where her blood came from, and what it carried. She knew that 10 years of being told she was nothing had not made her nothing. It had simply been 10 years of waiting for a truth that was always there, the whole time, quiet and patient, underneath everything they had piled on top of it. She touched the locket at her collarbone once, briefly, the way she had touched it 1,000 times before. Then she put both hands in her pockets and walked down the road, and the trees closed in on either side of her, and the morning light came through the branches in long, slow lines, and she did not stop walking. She had been silent for 10 years. She was not going to be loud all at once, but she had stopped pretending the silence was a choice she had made. That, she decided, was enough of a beginning. End.